And I am starting the webinar now.
Very good.
Good.
Welcome, everyone. We're just waiting as we let people into the webinar, so it'll just be a couple more minutes. Hello, everyone. My name is Annie Bunting. I teach in the Lawn Society program at York University in Canada, and it is my honor to moderate the discussion about the film, the documentary film by Chris Dolan and Patrick O'Team, Bringing Up Our Enemy's Child, which is a Refugee Law Project production. And I'm joining you from Toronto. We have a very international panel, and as is the case with our current pandemic online lives, there will be internet connection challenges, and we've started our morning with some weather and internet interruptions in Kampala. So we apologize for our late start. There may be a need to turn off a camera here and there or move closer to a modem. So again, we indulge your patience. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of the vital role of Pastor Innocent and his Mahanaim Revivals Ministries. And it was really through the deep engagement of Pastor Innocent with Refugee Law Project and all of the participants that you saw in the film that this event is able to take place. There was a premiere of the film yesterday, and Patrick and Innocent and Dr. Chris Dolan were able to actually engage in an in-person discussion, and today we're having the online webinar discussion. So it really is on the basis of this engagement that we're able to gather today. I'd also like to acknowledge the funders that made possible the production of this documentary film: the Swedish Research Council, the Riksbankens, SSHRC, which is Social Science and Research Council of Canada, the Conjugal Slavery and War Project, York University, Gothenburg University, and Makerere University. And behind the scenes, we have Gilbert Nurajira, who is doing our recording, who's letting people in, who I asked how to pronounce his name properly and I still bungled it. So my apologies, Gilbert. And we have about 100 people who've registered. And again, thank you for taking your time, wherever you find yourself this morning. We have 4 speakers who are going to take about 10 minutes each, and then we'll have as much time for open question and answer period after that. Our first speaker is Patricia Sellers. As many of you know, Patricia Sellers is the Special Advisor for Gender in the Office of the Prosecutor at the International Criminal Court. She's well known to everyone in the field of international criminal law as a leading lawyer, and having been the Special Advisor for many years, as well as the visiting fellow at the Kellogg College at Oxford University. Here she teaches international criminal law and human rights law, and will be starting those classes in a couple of weeks. She's been the legal advisor for gender, acting head of the legal advisory section, and a prosecutor at the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia, from 1994 until February of 2007. She's developed legal strategies and was a member of the trial teams in Akayesu and many other leading international criminal cases. These landmark decisions have been preeminent in our legal standards, both at the international level, but also at the grassroots, and how to mobilize those changing norms around war crimes, gender crimes, crimes against humanity, torture, and enslavement. And I'm going to turn now to Patricia Sellers to kick off our conversation about bringing up our enemy's child.
Thank you very much, Professor Bunting. First of all, can you hear me? Okay. I would really like to offer my gratitude to the organizers of this conference, but also to the makers of this film. I thank very much Pastor Innocent and your congregation, because what you have done is you have created a brave space. I think what we're about to embark upon is a rare conversation that requires a brave space. To speak of children who are born of rape, to speak of children who are born of rape in conflict, and then to speak of children who are brought back into the community in love, requires bravery. I know of no in-depth film or discussion where this has taken place. So therefore, I sincerely express my appreciation and congratulations to you. What touched me so much when I looked at the film was the segment where you saw the children singing, where you saw the children singing and smiling about other children, about how to love us, about how to recognize us as part of the community. For all too long, we have used children also often for the services of adults, as opposed to rejoicing in their life. I speak in particular about children as it relates to international criminal law. Children are often not hidden, but just not recognized enough as being part of the civilian population that suffers whenever we have armed conflict or social uprising that leads to crimes against humanity. We often forget children under the Geneva Conventions when we speak about prisoners of war. The child soldiers have been prisoners of war. And as rare as it might be, children are part of the shipwrecked and children are part of the wounded. We know ourselves that even when we throw attention onto children during war, it seems to be a second other than the child soldier. We look at recruitment and enlistment. We don't count how many of those children have suffered psychologically by tearing up their family, being away from their family, and being placed in a family that is then based upon violence. We don't look at the child soldiers who are girls who are forced to bear other children. And that brings me back to the children of sexual violence, often conceived during armed conflict, or just during the takeovers of the village. We need a brave space because we don't have a language yet. We don't have the adequate verbs. We don't have the adequate adjectives or phrases in which to really express both our anger as well as our bewilderment of children born in rape. We don't yet have the in-depth manner to sustain a conversation because we are either too fearful, at times we're too imbalanced, but at times we just remain stunned. The way to come out of being stunned, to create conversation, to create vocabulary. I think you allowed us with the singing of the children in this film. You allowed us to take a breath, to exhale, and to remember it's about loving children, as Pastor Emerson said several times. But what we really have to also recognize and formulate our thoughts, our conversation, and possibly start to arrive at resolutions are the many gendered harms that this situation reveals to us. And why do I say gendered harms? Another phrase that I get from the film. It's because we're in relationship with our own gendered self, inclusive of our biological, our sexual integrity, autonomy, and the way that we relate as gendered beings to other beings, whether they be our children, our partners, our grandmothers, our uncles or aunts, our neighbors, us within our communities, and as also rightly brought up, us within our states as perceived citizens or belonging to nationalities. This gendered identity that we carry, of course, can be vulnerable, can experience these gendered harms. And so when I understand that within this film, we looked at a father talking about his relationship to his wife, to his partner, to his child, but also to himself and to his community. We have not been able to adequately express the fear that rises within us when that person who might be closest to us could be a stranger, the foreigner, the enemy. These are thoughts that actually harm our very nature, our gendered nature. And we falter for words. We falter for whether our families can remain together or whether they are really families now. Are these siblings or just a grouping of different children? I go back to the children singing. The answer comes from them. But I'm not naive in this observation. I've been in international criminal law for about 25 years now. And I understand that this is a perennial, constant question. The child who really comes from the enemy's side, until it is loved enough that it is also. Might I just give you a couple of examples? I was very heartened to see Godly from Savota, which brings me back to the days of Rwanda. The women who were impregnated, raised what became, but what always was, were their own children. Today, the Yazidi women who have born children when captured by the Caliphate and ISIS have had to have dispensation, religious dispensation. And here I salute again Pastor Emerson, so that their religious leaders can say, these are our girls and women, therefore these are our children. I remember very well in Yugoslavia, where the Imam sent forth an edict to say that the women who had been raped were raising Muslim children. These are our children. And I must say that using my own example, being a descendant of American slaves, that far too often that we care to remember, much less discuss, African American women were forcibly raped by masters, or even by other slaves so that they could reproduce children who could be further enslaved and enrich the wealth of the masters. I descend, and many African Americans descend from families that took in the children of their masters because they are our community. They are not yours. They are ours. I would like to say that what we're really witnessing is the extension of love for our gendered selves, of which you've been able to open this conversation. I also would like to say that once I traveled back to Rwanda and I went to the Museum of the Genocide, and I asked a very foolish question. I asked one of the hosts at the museum, but when the children come in, the school children in, how did the Tutsi children and the Hutu children get over? And she said, we only have Rwandan children, which allowed me to understand that she was saying, we love all of our children. And I end as I begin by saying this brave space that you've opened up with love is one that we should fully come in, sit down, question our fears, voice our anguish, and maybe dare to have a little hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those thoughtful, insightful, and contextualizing comments, Patricia. And it reminds us, and I'm very grateful to you for reminding us about the emotions that are provoked as we watch this film, but also the long history of these conversations and the slow progress in having conversations as difficult as these, as challenging to find the words. And indeed, as you say, and how necessary it is to create that safe and brave space to try and develop a language to have the conversation. And I think that it's really a testament to the work of Dr. Chris Dolan and his colleagues at Refugee Law Project that these conversations are taking place. Chris has been the director of Refugee Law Project at the School of Law at Makerere and is also a visiting professor at Ulster University's INCOR and Transitional Justice Institute. He's worked extensively with refugees, ex-combatants, and internally displaced persons, researchers, and he writes and teaches on gender, conflict, and humanitarianism in general, and in particular, conflict-related violence, focusing on male survivors of sexual and gender-based violence, and in enabling disclosure. He really has been a lead voice in pushing the conversation to have, as you said, Patricia, the many gendered harms acknowledged, and also the dimensions for different of the same violence for many different people in our communities. And he has also been instrumental in supporting the work of refugee survivors that created the first ever support group of male refugee survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. And we've heard over the years from members of Men of Hope how important Chris's personal support has been of them and enabling them to have a safe space to have this conversation. And 6 years ago, I also remember the conversation around the round table with Patrick and Chris about this film and about the idea. And there was Patrick actually tweeted about this yesterday, how long and how much care it took for this film to come about, probably as long or maybe longer than some of their other productions. So I now turn it over to Dr. Chris Dolan.
Thank you so much, Annie. And yeah, I also want to start with just a few words of appreciation, if I may. Not least to some of our attendees. I know we have friends as far away as New Zealand who are heading towards the early hours of the morning, and others who've just woken up, like yourself, Annie. So we really appreciate everybody who's coming in out of normal hours just to be part of this conversation. I think that also shows a lot of commitment. you've mentioned the primary funders that led to this work. I want to just broaden it and say, our funding over the years has been some research, some has been more programmatic, and it's that combination that has allowed us slowly to develop our practical work, but also our analysis, some of which I hope has been reflected in this film. Within that, I want to make a special mention to Professor Maria Stern and Professor Maria Eriksson-Baas, with whom we collaborated for quite a number of years, and Dr. Harriet Gray, on a project looking at the forms and the impacts and the logics of conflict-related sexual violence. And that also fed into the making of this film. And in terms of my fellow panelists, I think I run out of words when I want to say thank you to Pastor Innocent, because as has already been flagged, this film is really a reflection of the safe space that he has been able to create, and without whom this conversation would still be very much less than it is at this point. A big thanks to Patrick. We have been collaborators for more than 20 years now, and with lots of fights along the way. But I hope that what you see is the very many excellent moments and deep discussions that have also been part of that collaboration. And also to Patricia, we first met in 2012 when I was the beneficiary of a training that she was part of giving, and where we also started a critical engagement, which I'm very happy that we have been able to sustain ever since, for nearly a decade now. And I'm very, very grateful to you, Patricia, for taking the time to join us on this event. Annie, you had asked me prior to the event, but to speak a little to the history of the film. Even in my remarks up to now, I think it's clear it's a long history. And it intersects with our broader work on sexual violence, but not only on sexual violence, on the whole question of where does sexual violence fit in with governance, and so on. But in terms of the film specifically, where the first thoughts about why can we make a film about this, for me it came about in the late 2000s, so around 2008, when I was able to visit Pastor's Church in Chaka refugee settlement, and the church was really remarkable in that they had at least 7 different, I don't know quite what to call them, but like support groups within the congregation around a number of different, very difficult issues. People who are dealing with living with HIV, or the men who are parenting children that they knew they were not the fathers of. There were a number of others as well. And it was sitting in a conversation with those men that I was just so struck by the dilemmas which they presented in the discussion, but also the emotions that they described, and also importantly their commitment to their relationships, in particular to their wives and their children, and their commitment to making those relationships work, despite the fact that there were these factors making it very, very complicated. And so that was really for me the starting point. Is can we capture that complexity? Can we capture the men as emotional beings, not as simply indifferent to the harms that those around them have suffered? And that later on led us into looking at really what is the interconnectedness between the visible victim that we see, the person who comes having been a victim of rape, having produced a child born of war, and those that are less visibly impacted and somewhere behind the scenes of the NGO office, the lawyer's office, the criminal trial. So really, as is mentioned in the film, and as Patricia mentioned, the idea of gendered harms and the fact that we're all gendered, and our gender always intersects with how we're reacting to particular situations, how we're feeling about particular situations, and none of us are gender neutral, and none of us escape from the sometimes very difficult emotions that produces. And then a third, I guess, incentive was to see how we can push for those interconnections to be reflected in programming, and to be reflected also in the discourse, because how we talk about something impacts on how we program, and how we program impacts on how we talk about it. And so it was really important for us to see whether we can, change the evidence base enough to bring about a change in programming and a corresponding change in discourse. So all of that sort of says why have we kept going at this film, which has been actually a very difficult project in so many ways. I think along the way, in the last decade or so, after we'd taken a decision to at least try, our own understanding has also substantially developed, and particularly what we now call multi-survivor programming, the fact that if we work only with women survivors and we don't look at how their situation is relating to their husbands, how it's relating to their children, and similarly with male survivors, what is that doing to their wives, to their children? That understanding has really developed quite a lot in the last decade for us. And at the same time, I think we've started to understand much more about how important it is to situate what's going on in the interpersonal level and the household dynamic, and to situate that in the larger political dynamic. And I think that's one of the things that I feel we've done fairly well in the film, is to bring in like this whole question of where do the Banyamulenge fit, and what does that disjointedness, what does that do? How does that relate to the sexual violence that led to the unwanted pregnancies, that led to the children born of war? And as we've been thinking through that, I think one of the things that cannot come out in the film as such, but has been the way we've been struggling with the title itself. So when we first talked, I think, Annie, when we first talked about this about 6 or 7 years ago, the title was bringing out My Enemy's Child. And we've changed it from My Enemies to, and that was enemy Y''S, singular. And it is now bringing up our enemy's plural child. So what that name change does is really to reflect, or an attempt to capture the broader political dynamic, and to suggest that much though we're always very careful about rape as a weapon of war, because it has been used and abused in many ways, but to suggest that if you're looking at what are the real impacts, where does that phrase actually make sense? Where does it actually describe what has happened to people? So that's why we changed it to Our Enemy's Child, because we feel like if you watch the film and you look at the impacts from the individual, the mother, through to the husband, through to the child born of war, him or herself, through to their siblings, then and then how that impacts on silences in the community, difficulties as a result of those silences, then you can say, well, this is definitely contributing to the dynamics of war. So we feel that the film supports the use of that, the careful use, always careful, but the use of that language of rape as a weapon of war. But we really wanted to evidence it rather than just have a glib use of the phrase as if we all understand what it means and we can take it all for granted. Have I taken my time? Can I have one more minute?
You're at 10, but I'll indulge you one more minute.
Yeah, I think just a last comment, a couple of comments. One is just the 10 years is not just all about our own conceptual struggles, but really around the difficulties of disclosure and the struggles of enabling disclosure. And I think Patrick will speak more to that in terms of, we've had many conversations, not just with the person who is in the film as a parent, but with many others who told us so many things, but were unable then to do that on camera. So we still need to really grapple with the question of disclosure. And I understand why people don't want to do that, because every survivor who speaks up is taking on the whole weight of so many people's disapproval and, on behalf of others. So it's incredibly courageous to do it. And you, as Patricia has said, you need a brave space in which to do that, and you need brave people to do that. But it does also relate back to our difficulties in enabling disclosure. And I would say that as a whole, collectively, we're not so good at doing that, and we need to pay attention to that. And lastly, and this comes from one of the leaders of one of our support groups yesterday in the live screening. And she said, you cannot understand unless you put on our shoes. And, I think that's a challenge to everybody who hasn't worn the shoes or at least tried to put them on. You cannot understand unless you put on our shoes. And I think I want to end on that note of let us all try to put on the shoes, both of the mothers and of the fathers, or of the parents and of the siblings and of the neighbors. We need to try on all of those shoes and see where we get to. Thanks very much, Annie.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much. And as you eloquently put it, there has been an evolution in all of our thinking and in all of our programming and international prosecutions and research and support with survivors groups that we always find gaps. We always have challenges in naming particular harms. And then through a process of conversation, difficult conversation, safe spaces, we then hopefully push at those edges to create programming and legal responses that are more holistic, more effective, more gender sensitive, and more survivor centered. And here again, I think it segues nicely to Pastor Innocent's contribution in creating and then nurturing those spaces, those support groups, and that commitment through faith and the church and through relationships, really being mindful of those relationships to support the families, and in particular, as this film documents, the men. And going back to your point, Chris, about stigma, I think it connects to Patricia's point about maybe the way in which the children who are who may be going out into the world and experiencing the political context, and yet they're so young they don't understand that, and then that actually then comes back into the homes and into the family dynamics. So I'd like to turn now to Pastor Innocent, who is a passionate community leader overseeing the Mahanaim Revival Ministries in the Chakatu refugee settlement in Western Uganda. He himself is a refugee from Congo and is a member of the Banyamulenge tribe. He's been in Uganda since 2007 doing this work, and he has been the one that, as Chris said, has been enabling disclosure and supporting survivors in these really important and difficult and challenging conversations. Pastor Innocent, we welcome you.
Thank you very much, Madam Anna. And I want to thank all of you who are on this discussion, wherever you are. Thank you very much. And we are praying to God to help you and to bless you in all what you are doing. Thank you very much, Dr. Chris, who engaged me in this activity of making or to be a part of this film to show what people are passing through in Chaka, even where we came from. My thanks is to So thank you, Dr. Chris, and even the team you are leading. Also, God bless you so much. As you've seen the film, there are very many things there. Maybe what I cannot tell at this time because there are very many, but I will maybe talk to a few points. As Madam Anne has said, I came from Congo. I'm in Banyamulenge tribe. I'm here in Uganda since 2007. And there we came with very many people who passed through these problems of war. And some of those, we have these children who were born out of rape. We have them there in Chaka, in the communities. We have them in the churches. Some are my neighbors where I stay. Others, they are my church members. So that is where we started this church to help those people who passed through those challenges. First, they had the challenge of losing their properties, losing their relatives, and even those challenges of being raped and even having these children who are born out of rape. And remember, these children, they have their moms, but the fathers are not there. So, but they have, they are living with these fathers who are not theirs in homes. And these fathers also, they have also a big challenge to stay with these children. So we decided to start this church, Mahanaimu, and that name it is in Genesis chapter 32 from verse 2 to 3. That's where you will find the Mahanaimu. Maybe without wasting my time, starting this church, we wanted to help these people through the word of God. And I think you've seen children singing in the church and even people preaching in the church. The songs we are talking about having a hope of the future. We should not lose hope, my relatives, my people, my colleagues. Though we are in the settlement, but there is hope that life can change. And then also the preaching, you saw the man preaching in the church was also talking about the love of our enemies, the enemies who took our properties and even who raped our wives, so and so on. So the sermon was about the love for our enemies. So that's where we started this program of helping our people. It was not only that one. As Dr. Chris said, when he visited us in Chaka, we have different people, even different groups. We put them in groups to see how we can close to them, talking to them. We have people who are affected by this war, the HIV positive, children born out of rape, the women who were raped, those kind of people. We tried to group them in groups so that we can talk to them in the groups, even we could visit them in their homes, and even the churches could come with these sermons of helping them, giving them hope, that this is not the end of the life. The life will continue. Though we left the country, we are in the camp, life is not easy, but this is not the end of life. Then the challenge which is there, it is on these children who are born out of rape. They were like discriminated. They even discriminated themselves to hear. If once they hear that he was born in such a way, for sure it is painful to them. So we tried to close to them and talk to them. But they are also a human being. They were born not in the plans of their parents or his or her plans, but it is in God's plan, let us say that, because God knows each and everything from the beginning and up to the end. So these children, they should also have hope of living, of that they are useful people. They will be even useful persons in their families, in their countries, in the world. That's what we could tell them. And we are happy some of them that have understood. They are now at school, they are with others, they feel like they are in the family. Another challenge, it was the fathers who are staying with these children at home. Also, we tried, I think you saw one of them in the film, has that child, but you could also try to go to them. Yes, these children, they were born in such way, but in our culture, we cannot chase someone from the family. That person was born in the family, or that child was born in the family. He has the blood of the mother, and it is not easy to chase the mother or to chase the child. No, we have to keep the child at home, and we don't even want the relatives of this child to know that this one was born out of rape, like that. But the father has that painful in his heart. So we were trying to show the father that it happens, should understand, should stay with this child, knowing that it is a human being like him. And he has to forgive the enemies, because that is what the Bible says. It says, love yourself and even your enemies as you love yourselves. That's what the Bible says. That we could also direct them to the Bible, to the verses from the Bible. So now, the people who have those challenges, problems with children who were born out of rape, now in our settlements here in Uganda and even other countries, the number is increasing. The war is still there. It is in Eastern Congo. I think you know what is passing there. So the refugees more coming this side. The more war is increasing, the more the number of these children is increasing. We have many in Jaka. My humble request, it is like we should have work hard and see how we can help these people. The way we are doing it in Jaka, as I've said, we are putting them in the groups so that we can talk to them. But now the number is too big. We need also more people to come and help us. As the Refugee Project came there, and I remember we had those groups and they talked to them. Only at that time when they came, people were ready to talk, what happened to them. But later on, when they came back again, you know, they shied, they couldn't even talk that I faced this challenge like that. Up to now, we are still having that challenge because they have not yet feel that feeling that they should understand how they have to understand, to know, to have these children like theirs. It is still hard. So that's why I'm requesting that we should not give up, but let us continue closing to these people, grouping them in the groups. We are also there preaching to them through the word of God. We need more support to help these people. I think we all know the problems of these people, the children, the mothers who are keeping these children, and who are even staying with these fathers. So those are the people we should meet. We need more effort. We need more, I can say, to pull out our socks, our shoes, so that we can move and we reach where they are. They are in different areas, in Chaka and the other camps, for sure they are there. So they have that painful in their hearts. So to help them, since we are engaged in helping these people, I think with God, we shall make it. We, as we are here, and even other people, I know we shall make it through the power of God. I hope That's what I wanted to share with you. If my time is not bad to me or to all of us, thank you very much, and God bless you so much.
Thank you so much, Pastor Innocent, and your timing was perfect, and your words were very powerful. I think it's also really interesting that you mentioned other countries, as did Patricia Sellers, that with the Yazidi situation. We also have the situation in northern Nigeria with children born to Boko Haram fathers, and I know there that faith and community leaders are also engaging with the community to try and address the stigma. And as Patricia said, that the faith leaders are the ones who can say, no, these are our children are Muslim, or our children are Christian, these are our children. And I think it's really important that you came back to sing to songs and to preaching. And I think that these are really important, and they're really communicated in really beautiful ways through the film. And I was going to tease Patrick that maybe when he came back with his big cameras, and maybe that's why people might have gotten a bit shy. So our final speaker is Otim Patrick, who is the video advocacy manager at Refugee Law Project, where he's actually worked for 14 years doing community outreach with forced migrants. He's an alumni of Video Advocacy Institute by the organization Witness, and he's used this opportunity to build his filmmaking skills, and he's seen several of his earlier works have some attention and success. Indeed, I would recommend the film Gender Against Men for all of us here, and it won the Best Documentary at the Kenya International Film Festival in 2009. I can't believe it was 2009. Patrick's approach to his current work allows him to tell digital change stories of those Refugee Law Project, from Refugee Law Project, but also to use those films to stimulate conversation like the one that we're having here. He's currently a trainer, passing his filmmaking skills on to others, including hosting youth in the refugee settlements in northern Uganda, where he helps young people advocate on their own and using these skills for community rights through the use of film and engaging their audiences. Patrick, over to you.
Thank you very much, Annie, and a very good afternoon from Uganda to all the viewers online. First of all, I want to make it clear here, and I want to say that we are talking about shocking experiences. Yeah, they are shocking lives of people in the settlements. And when Dr. Chris asked me to go and tell the story, it was like he was asking me to put on the shoes of all these people. And so, yes, I took the liberty, and I think the first time I came into contact with this issue, it was in 2007. I got a document that was kind of writing exactly what had taken place and the issues that the men were raising. And so it was not until around 2013 that I visited the settlement in Chaka refugee settlement. And I remember very well that Dr. Chris sent me down there and said, this is what I want you to do. There is a story about these men who were raising children born out of them. And he gave me an overview of what was going on. And to me as a filmmaker, it was not easy to start visualizing how to bring emotions. And to date, I think I must say that the films that we've watched and we portray exactly the emotions that you experience when you walk into that church. The songs that we've used in the films, the different categories, the groups of people that sing there, they all sing their emotions. And if you are in that room, I believe it will move you. And so as a tool for advocacy, I thought this was going to be a great input into the film. And that's why I made sure that in terms of telling the story, I used the songs to create interlude to introduce new issues into the film. That said, I think it's important, first of all, because I have learned a lot. The 10 years was actually a journey for me because I was emotionally also engaged with the people. I know Pastor kept on calling me here and there once in a while to check on me. What's the progress? But what was most challenging was that first day that I visited Pastor, and they kind of interrogated me with several other pastors. I felt like a sinner trying to talk about my sins. And their question was, you've come here. What is it that you want to do with us? Why do you choose the church? What is it that you want us to expect? Supposing you take our stories and use it somewhere else to make money. And so there were so many other questions that it was so hard for me to respond to immediately. And I remember in terms of approach as video advocacy, we intend to do no harm to all the victims or all the survivors or clients that we work with. And so I remember returning and sharing with Chris my experience, which was not so easy. And so we planned, we said, what we need to do is first of all to go back for a workshop, because that workshop would help to break the ice. And I remember in 2008 that Chris is talking about when he visited the church then. It wasn't Pastor Innocent at the time, yeah? And so when I went back in 2013, it was a whole new face. And so they didn't remember. Of course, Innocent did remember, but then it was a whole new group of pastors who were there, and I had to engage with them. And so after several days of engaging with them, we had agreed we'd go back for a workshop. And indeed, we went with Chris, Dr. Chris, and we had a 2-day workshop. And that is our approach to our work. We want to do a participatory kind of approach, whereby if we are doing anything, we need to involve and engage the very community. And so I'm happy that in that conference, in that workshop, we were close to 14 men who sat to discuss the issues. And after a very elaborate introduction and overview, they were able to say, okay, these are our stories, and I think we are ready to say it. We are able to talk about it. And I remember we split into groups of 3. And so Dr. Chris went with a few men, actually visited them in their homes. I did the same, and another colleague, Giordine, did the same. And so at individual and personal level, each of those men gave us testimonies of what they were going through. And like I said, it's so hard for us to capture that on video, but they told us of so many stories that are unbelievable in terms of what they were going through. And it's unfortunate that in this film, little can actually come out, but we are happy that from the film, we are able to shed light. We are trying to point a direction to the humanitarian organizations, partners, stakeholders, to look into the direction that we have now managed to bring out to the public. And so in telling the story, I had to put on the shoes, yeah? And so the first was, of course, within the organization. I had to think about what Chris's mind was reading and try to visualize it. But of course, there were 2 teams, there are two programs. We have the gender and sexuality program and the mental health and psychosocial well-being program. These 2 programs work with clients, and they have ethical issues around those. But at a level of advocacy, the gender and sexuality program, we're saying that it is time for us to make the case. And the case was that there are children who are born out of rape, and little is known about it, and people are not talking about it. That is going to affect the next generation. And that was genuine enough, yeah? But we had the mental health and psychosocial well-being who were not in agreement with the title. The title bringing up My Enemy's Child at the time, they felt like it was re-traumatizing the children. It was stigmatizing the children, yeah? And so the 10 years delay is not necessarily only the making of the film. There is the do's and the don'ts. There is the ethical issues. Even the mere fact that you need to go into the settlements, you need the permission, you have to, state your reason why you're doing this project. with the camp authority. All those take a lot of time and processes and explanation. And so that was part of the making of the film, which I thought was key for me to mention here. And the fact that the story is challenging. It challenges the logic. Because if from the first time we were thinking about raising enemies' children, I tried to put on that shoe. And all of us here, when we try to put on that shoe, most men will say it's almost impossible. And indeed, it's impossible, like Pastor said. The men who are in the settlements, actually, they do things probably because the church has told them this is the right thing to do. And thanks to Pastor for having time to counsel people, to make them love each other, to look at children as human and not as another race. And so even the man who agreed to talk to us, you could tell that he could not actually accept raising this child. And for years, he's been raising this child. And I think my interaction with him was the first time that he ever showed disgust about this kid. Yeah. I'm not saying that he's a bad father. And I'm not saying that he's a bad parent, he's parenting the child bad, wrongly. But I'm saying he was speaking out his emotions. And I think it's key for us to understand that what these men go through needs to be talked about. And unfortunately, of the 14 men that we were meant to interview and share their experiences with us, only one was able to talk about it. And so how many more are not going to speak about it until they're gone? And so yesterday we had this conversation and we said, for the children who were born, they were young and now they've become adults. What will they become? Yeah. And so I think in terms of telling the story, it was not easy for me to get the visuals that would explain some of these emotions that had to go through our minds and listening to all these stories. I think for me, bringing up our enemy's child is a starting point for all of us. We can take a bit of what we've done as Refugee Law Project and build on it, but there's a lot still to be done. And so when I walked into the settlements, there were several issues to be raised. One was the Banyamulenge as a people, because they had so many issues they had raised with the settlement administration. And to them, the marginalization was not only where they come from in Eastern DRC, but also within the settlements, because some of the people that they fled way back at home actually followed them back in the settlement and they live with them. And so because the offenses probably would have happened across borders, it's hard to follow up when they're in this country. And so they have to live with this on a daily basis. But as Refugee Law Project, we were kind of careful also not to get political. And so the issue of the Banyamulenge as a marginalized community who are facing different challenges, we tried to play it down because we thought it would get political, but we cannot do much. We cannot do much. All we wanted to focus was first the children that were born out of rape. And so leaving the community, the Banyamulenge, we said, okay, we have these men. These are the issues they're going through. And so, yeah, it was very hard to detach the women from the conversations. Each time we tried to have a private conversation with the men, the women would come around and they would ask to also contribute. And much as we interviewed a few of them, you could tell that there was no way that we were going to act separately or detaching the women from the conversation. And so even when we wanted to relay the stories of the men, we had to bring the stories of the women in it. And so this complexity as well brings also the children, because for those men that are raising these children as a result of rape, they have a kind of secondary, effect on the children. And so there's a way that we thought that we should bring all this. And so all this was running in my mind in terms of which audience should I target? Yeah. Should you target the Banyamulenge? Should you target the women? Do you target the men? And then the children, who will say their story? Who will tell their story? And so in the end, we also were looking at the bystanders. Yeah, we have bystanders who probably the UN that are in Congo, all this happens in their watch. What about the international organizations and the different partners in the settlements? Are they looking at these issues and are they just shying away, or they just want to ignore like they know nothing about it? And so in terms of choosing the audience, it was quite difficult for us. And I'm glad that we just said, I think at this point, what is right is to bring an advocacy video that will raise awareness. And depending on what specialty a particular organization is targeting, we could then pick it up from there. And so in terms of making the film, I think choosing the audience was key and very troublesome. It became a challenge at some point, but thank God that finally came up. But another thing in terms of audience also, we wanted a wider conversation. And so when we looked at the kind of stakeholders we deal with, let's say partners, policymakers, stakeholders, we realized that these were a small group of people and it does not involve the public, yeah? And so that is where the style of the film came in. We then started thinking, do we have to make a documentary? But then because the affected communities were not ready to speak on camera, it became very hard for us to follow individuals on their daily basis and try to record and film their stories. And remember that this very community, the issue of confidentiality, they wanted it not disclosed. And so, for example, many of them are leaders within their communities and they offer hope to the communities. But one of them clearly told me that if you show my face, then I think my life is over. And when I asked why, he says, everyone here looks up to me. And as I speak to you now, nobody knows that this child is actually born out of the community. Know that, then that shame I'll not be able to handle. Mm-hmm. And so you can see the amount of secrecy within a community. And the fact that I just spoke to one person, it doesn't mean it stops at that. We, like Pastor Innocent just mentioned that at the time we just reached there, it was around 23,000 refugees at the time, the settlement. And now to date, he made mention, I hope you'll correct me, they're about 123,000. And all of them that come into the settlements come with similar situations and they live for over 10 years. And so these children actually grow, they outgrow some of this. And we start to see that, are we normalizing the issues around raising children out of rape? Because then if we normalize it, then the circle of violence will then start to eat our society. And that's why we think that the public needs to know what is going on. And in terms of what we needed to do, we thought of how do we produce a film that can then go into the festivals where we engage a wider public who are not necessarily in the civil society circle. But again, the challenge was also about having the cast members who could actually bring out the emotional, aspect of the stories. And in the end, we thought, what if we use the docudrama? and still we felt we would not have professional actors to bring the issues, and so we thought it would not actually carry the message we wanted. And in the end, we settled for a narrative-driven documentary. By this, we said, let's have the experts speak, which you saw from their experiences. They spoke about how they've been relating to the victims and the survivors. And thank God that Innocent was there as someone who has worked with communities. I've asked him, how many children are there that you have that are born out of rape? And I think Pastor has no idea. He knows personal ones, but he says there are so many. And so this brings the question of how do we profile these issues? Do we profile these children? Because in terms of if we need to, and it is counting. It's counting, and I think the public needs to understand that within us now we have such children, and so there is need for special attention in terms of offering psychosocial support to these survivors.
I'm gonna cut you. I'm gonna
in terms
cut you
of
off.
also style,
Patrick, I know Patrick, I know it's
Okay.
painful. It's painful, but I
Yeah.
have to say I did give you advance warning that I was going to do that. So
Yes.
I'm mindful of time, and it's interesting that you were just mentioning the psychosocial support. We had a comment about the need for more psychosocial support for children, families, and communities in these situations in the chat. And we started a bit late, so if people can stay a couple of minutes, that would be great. After the top of the hour, wherever that hour finds you. And so I would like to open it up to question and answers for the panel as a whole, for an individual. And I think some of the issues perhaps that you were coming to, Patrick, will come back. And I really think that the points about the ethics, the confidentiality, the trust that's necessary, the time that it takes, and your example of, speaking with 14 men and one who's willing to go on camera, even with his identity not disclosed. So all of these are incredibly important issues to come back to. So I would like to open it up for questions. I'm not sure actually, Gilbert, whether I'll be able to see. I can follow the chat as well. I should be able to see when people raise their hands. And I'll just give people a chance to pop a question into the chat or to raise their hand. Maybe while people are formulating
There's
their
a hand up.
questions. Oh, there is a
There's
hand up. Oh, maybe I can't see it. So perhaps you can call on them, Patrick.
Zachary. Can you speak, Zachary? Zachariah. Zachariah, can you hear us? There is also, if Zachariah can't speak, can Bosco or Pira speak? Gilbert, is there any way we can unmute in case it's on your part? Gilbert?
Okay, so there's no opportunity to unmute themselves. So it will have to be up to Gilbert on our
Gilbert.
side.
Yes, yeah. I think they could keep their hands up, and when Gilbert comes, you would unmute them.
One of the things, maybe as we're waiting, I wanted to go back to Patricia with a question, especially as we've heard all of the rich interventions, from Patrick and Chris and Innocent. I was wondering whether, in your investigations over time, whether these issues in particular around the impact on husbands, on men and on children, how much that was talked about. Because I remember, for example, in the investigations around Akayesu, there was discussion around forced relationships and forced marriages, but then it just dropped off and it didn't come back until many, many years later. And I wondered about these issues with regard to children, youth, and husbands.
Thanks, Professor Benton. What I can say is that at the Yugoslav Tribunal, they had this section of the proceeding that was used for what was referred to as impact statements, meaning what was the impact of the crime on the witness. And usually that impact of the crime in many ways talked about during the context of the armed conflict and not the context of 10 years later or 15 years later, as we're now discussing children. But every now and then, because the trials took so long and often didn't occur until years later, you would get an impact statement that talked about the after effect of the trauma. There are very few, to my understanding, that really spoke about raising a child born of rape. But I very much remember one of the witnesses that I had in the Nikolic trial spoke, she testified to the court about the impact of her child who had been with her in the concentration camp. And now 10 years later, she referred to that experience in the camp and also that child who was maybe 10 to 12 at the time, seeing his mother being taken out every night and imagining that she was being raped and sexually assaulted. And in fact, she was. But that impact had a very detrimental place in his mental health. And the child really had to struggle with thoughts of suicide. And so I say this to say that it's extremely important that the aftermath of family relationships be part of the impact in terms of knowing what the crime actually set forth, generated within the family dynamics, but from the judge's point of view of knowing the impact of the crime in terms of sentencing.
Thanks very much, Patricia. I have a question from Courage for all of the panelists, directed to all of the panelists. Is it possible for us to start thinking about a remedy for the women raped before children are brought into the world? The International Criminal Court recently convicted Dominic Ongwen for the crime of forced pregnancy. We should advocate for legalization of abortion in such cases. And this also links to the preamble that was on the call for this webinar about linking this discussion to a broader discussion about the Texas developments in the United States around access to abortion. I don't know who wants to take that question on.
Can I just briefly add that in terms of the Ongwen case, while the case did bring forward forced pregnancy for the first time as a conviction under international criminal law, the case did not bring forward actually the children who were born of rape as being immediately enslaved children. The mother was enslaved, the child was born, the child is per se enslaved because the same forces that exercise powers of ownership of the mother do the same with the child. So the court did not look at that in terms of a specific charge, but what the court has done and is in the process of doing, understood that in terms of reparations, that reparations are owed to the child via the mother for the crime that was inflicted upon the mother.
Thanks so much. Chris, did you want to add there?
I think when we put that in the email because it was it's coming up so much as an issue in the US right now. So it was just interesting that, you know, we have this attempt to open up discussions, and then at the same time there are equal pressures closing down discussions. And I think also because, you know, there's a very interesting part of the film in which there's a discussion about, you know, how the man and his wife discussed whether or not they should pursue an abortion while they were still waiting, while the child was still during the gestation period. So it was for that reason that we put it in, that, you know, clearly, much though the members of that church and of many other churches as well will have very strong views about abortion and a lot of opposition to it, and I think that comes across very clearly in the film as well. But within that, there is still a discussion that people are having. So much though they chose that they were not going to pursue that path, and it's a very difficult path to pursue in Uganda because abortion is not legal. But just the very fact that the discussion was there right in the heart of the home, we thought was important to bring it up and to say, well, okay, how does that then relate to these broader discussions? If I may, I wanted to jump to another question.
Sure, I had one question for Pastor Innocent in the chat as well.
Okay. I wanted to address the question of the issues facing children born of war and their families in many different contexts. So how did you navigate balancing local, contextually specific challenges with larger political issues? I mean, I think our approach was, well, we chose to focus in on a particular case study, let me say. We did, at various stages in the 10 years of making the film, we had a whole section about the children born under the Lebensborn program of the Nazis in Norway. And when we screened that version of the film in Chaka, in the church, you know, that was a point at which people felt that we were really going, somehow we'd lost the plot. And because we want this film to make sense and to resonate in the constituencies where we're working directly, we decided that a case study that is very concrete and very, you know, goes into quite a lot of depth, but also will make a lot of sense to many of the constituencies we work with here, that was going to be a more effective advocacy video. I think that the broader issues, they come up anyway, depending on how you view the film and how you understand it. But to me, they're in there. I think Patrick very gently mentioned the issue of bystanders. And I mean, bystanders is a global issue. It's not particular to this particular dynamic. I think Patricia and I had a very interesting conversation in preparation for this about, you know, the historical examples where these same challenges are very present. And so I think it's for people to make the connections. We can't capture all these the very many different variations on the theme, if you like, that have occurred across place and across time. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Chris. Pastor Innocent, I have a question for you from Jimmy that says, thanks panelists for great submissions, and thanks RLP for the great advocacy narrative-driven documentary. Pastor did mention that the numbers of these children keep swelling with the increase of the influx of refugees. This also means that with the protracted conflicts and prolonged stay in the settlements, some of these children are growing to adults, some of whom perhaps know the circumstances surrounding their conception and birth. Without proper redress, I'm sure the effects multiply and get amplified, engendering new violations. I wonder how the church is dealing with such situations.
Thank you very much for the question. I don't know if I can answer it as it is, but we can all sit together But in the church, we have these children, not only in the church, even in other neighbors who are not the member of our churches. They are there, and we are not only helping our church members. We are leaders. We are helping the community. Though we have where we are fellowshipping from, where we are spreading the word of God, but also we have a task of talking to our neighbors who have those challenges. So now we have the children who have grown up and who are born out of rape. Some they have understood already since we have started talking to them as church members, not only in that angle, even as the neighbors, they have understood. Some of them even got married. They are now in their homes. And there are others, as I've said, who are still new in that area. Those are the people we are trying to talk to them so that they can also understand. And we are trying to use even these ones who have grown up to talk to them, to show how they are also feeling this, or how they are also, they were born and they grew up, and even how they are feeling in the families, because for them, they have already understood this. Though not fully, you know, that one cannot say that fully they have understood it. Sometimes they face those challenges when they are talking to the neighbors, telling them some bad words, but they come to us and immediately we tell them that, yeah, that will happen, but you have to understand it. Even other people who did not born in this situation or in this way, they also have other problems, which is not like this, but also they have problems. So the church is still there talking to these people, and we are trying all our best. We talk to the families having these children and even these mothers, these fathers, and we see how they can also support these children, and they grow up knowing that they are also human beings in the society. And also talking to the parents who are having this, how they should stay together with these wives who are raped, who are delivered these children, and also the neighbors. Sometimes they are the neighbors who are bringing the issues, but we are trying to talk to everyone who can support, who can help. I think I've answered. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Mary in the Q&A is applauding your great work for helping different families coping with raising innocent children, as she said. I'd like to give each of the panelists 1 more minute. And in our last 5 to 8 minutes together. And Patrick, I wondered if you might also answer or respond to a similar question about the way in which film advocacy and the trainings that you do with youth have a similar, or my question is really, what sort of impact are you seeing in terms of using both the film in peer support, but also the skills training working with young people? Or anything else you'd like to that I didn't let you finish on, Patrick?
Thank you, Annie. As a tool, we use video advocacy, and we've used this for, like I said, close to 10 years. We've used these films to advocate for issues, to start debates in different conferences and platforms. But over the period, we realized that we need to let our clients speak for themselves. And that's where we went ahead to start equipping the youth with the skills. And so video advocacy for us does not just stop at content development. What we've gone further to do is to empower the young people, especially in the refugee settlements, and equip them with the necessary basic skills and equipment so that they're able to advocate for their own issues. And so for a film like this one, the video, Bringing Up Our Enemy's Child, we already have video advocates. These young people who we've trained over time, they're close to now coming to 140 something plus. I need to get the numbers right. But these are spread all over in the settlements. But also in Kampala, the urban center, a long time with actually now youth film members on the issues affecting. And so
Patrick is frozen, I think. And that's not my intervention, just saying. I didn't freeze him. Let me actually.
our of video advocacy but also disseminate is to start seeing how to disseminate in them films such as this, especially.
Thanks, Patrick. I have a question in the Q&A, Chris, for you. Sorry, Patrick, we lost you a little bit, but I think we got the essence. Sorry about that. Chris, in the Q&A, there's a question about the longer term psychological impact on the family. And I wondered whether you might respond to that question. And I'm not sure that everyone in our virtual audience would necessarily know about the RLP model in terms of psychosocial support.
Yeah, thank you very much, Annie, and thanks, Mary Campogo, for the question. I'll just read it for people who haven't been able to access the chat. And I want to apologize that we've had these technical difficulties with the Q&A, and I hope that anyone who hasn't managed to get their question in will send us an email and we'll forward it to the right panel member to give an answer. So Mary writes, the church is doing a great job of helping different families cope with raising these innocent children. And the film is a great job done. However, should we not be also thinking about the possible longer term psychological impact of a network of family secrets? And you know, I think certainly as Refugee Law Project, our position is that these secrets, if held very long term, can also be very, very damaging. But that also disclosing them it has to be the person's own decision and their own choice. And our role is to create the enabling environment in which people can make that decision and can make that choice, and then be there to walk with them through what follows from disclosing. Because of course, it can be incredibly painful, it can be distressing, and that pain and the distress can take weeks, days, months to work through, or even a lifetime. And so we don't just say you should disclose for the sake of disclosure. We say if you feel able to disclose, then we're also here to try and walk with you to where that will take you. And it will not necessarily be an easy journey, but we tend to believe, I think, as an organization, that in the longer run, being able to talk about such things and being able to break the silences around secrets and the tensions that can create within the family is a much, in the longer run generally, is a much better outcome for individuals. And I believe that, you know, we can demonstrate that through very many people that we have worked with and walked with on those journeys, for whom being able finally to talk about something that they felt they could never talk about, that they felt they might have to take to the grave with them, has been a beneficial process. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. We have time for one more question that I'll direct to Patricia and to Pastor Innocent. The first part of the question is whether the children are considered victims and their parents victims in international law. And the second part of the question for Pastor Innocent is, are the grown-up children, the youth among them, forming strong relationships and friendship in the camp or community? So I'll go first to Patricia and then to Pastor Innocent to close us off.
Right, thank you. Well, in terms of the children being victims or even survivors under international criminal law, it depends on how one approaches the charging. As I've said before, if the mothers or the fathers are in a situation of enslavement, the children are per se enslaved. But I think one could also go that even if the parents were not in such a situation, that a child who is born through rape and the armed conflict is continuing to go on is probably a child that will be treated in a situation that is inhumane. So we have charges such as other inhumane acts with cruel treatment. I think that one has to also understand that concurrent to international criminal law, you have human rights violations that are not derogated or accepted from during armed conflict. So the child might therefore be a victim or survivor of a human rights violation, which of course goes back to the state. And I think the point that I would like to conclude on is that when we talk about stigma, we talk about secret, the public secret, in many ways we're referring to the intra-relationships of families or of community. I think that we can't forget that it is often the political state, possibly the cultural, ethnic, religious community that is also holding the silence. And so what you have a survivor being forced to continue and to push against is the enforced silence by the state or by the community. And you have to ask yourself, why is that silence there? What is the state pretending that it's preserving? What is the state defending against by throwing up this wall of silence that the survivors have to work against? So I think when we look at stigma, we have to look at what is the state's stigma and when will the state release it? What is the cultural community stigma and when will that be released so that the survivor can breathe? And I just want to finish on this wonderful, one of my favorite James Baldwin quotes that says that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And I think that this film, Patrick, that we've made has allowed us to face what could be changed.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And Pastor Innocent, I'm going to turn to you for our last words. Just need to unmute. Yeah. You're still on mute. Oh, there you
are. Okay. Now, can you come again with the question? What does the question say?
The question asked about the grown-up children and the youth and whether they're forming strong support groups, friendships, and relationships in the camp.
Yes, in the camp, yeah, we have very many groups of youth, and they have different activities. Those who came from like the same area and the same communities, when they arrived here in the Chaka, the settlement, some of them, they joined together doing some activities. That's where we are trying to engage these also children who are like discriminated, who are not even feeling that they can join others or they can be part of their colleagues who are the same age. So the church is trying to engage them in the youth of the church who are having the activities which can join together these people and they can work together having the same activities. So even the names which they have, they are the names which they were given by the parents. We are also at the church trying to give them other good names which they can feel that they're in the church, they're in the community. Yes. Those are some of the names we are we are giving them. And even these names which they are having since they were born, yeah, they grew up with them, but in the church also, you may call her Grace or him John or what, those names to make him feel that he's in the community. So, yeah, that's sometimes what we do to show them that we are together, and it is not even showing. We feel that one that we are with them. We also want them to feel that they are with us. Even the names that they have, they are theirs, they are like others, those things. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Pastor Innocent. And I know it's harder on these in virtual environments to sort of feel the appreciation, but I can tell from the chat and from the Q&A that everyone has really appreciated the conversation as well as the documentary film. And congratulations to Patrick and Chris on a really provocative, challenging, and really insightful piece of work that will definitely be part of conversations for a long time to come. And I know that the audience will join me in thanking our 4 panelists for really insightful comments and reflections and invitations for us to do more work in this area. So thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks to Refugee Law Project for hosting. And thanks again to Gilbert Nuagira, who has been having to struggle behind the scenes, in fact, even giving his computer to Pastor Innocent and having to deal with it behind the scenes. So thanks again, Gilbert, and thanks to everyone who was here and part of the conversation. Have a great day or evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. I should do the same.